The sun rose like a blade across the desert sky, slicing heat into the skin of the living and the dead alike. Martha Clay opened her eyes to light so bright it felt like a punishment. Her breath was shallow, her tongue thick with dust. The only sound was wind scraping over cracked earth, and the crows. She tried to sit up but couldn't. Her left side screamed. Her right hand clutched a wooden cross, the one she'd carved with a butter knife. It was too small, barely longer than her palm, but it was all she could manage before the spade broke in the rocky soil. Her daughter lay beneath that shallow mound, wrapped in a patchwork quilt that had once hung by a hearth. Martha blinked back tears. Crying wasted water. "Mama," a voice whispered, so small it almost didn't exist. It was Lila. She crouched beside the grave, her tiny hands wrapped around the neck of a broken doll. Her dress was stained with blood, not hers, thank God. Beside her sat Joey, his face smeared with dirt, his eyes hollowed by hunger and grief far too big for 9 years. Martha gritted her teeth and forced herself upright. Pain lanced through her ribs. She'd fallen from the wagon days ago, maybe cracked something, but there was no use thinking about that now. "They're not coming back, are they?" Joey asked, voice flat. Not angry. Not even surprised. Just done. Martha didn't answer. What was there to say? The settlers had left 2 days ago, after a vote around the fire. They'd argued that slowing for a wounded old woman and 2 extra mouths would cost them all. Disease had already taken 3. Bandits were rumored along the canyon trail. The prairie didn't forgive weakness. So they left them. A sack of jerky. A dented canteen. A broken spade. That was their mercy. Martha's first instinct had been rage. But it had burned out too quickly, replaced by something colder. Something heavier. She was the last adult now. The last protector. If she died, the kids wouldn't make it past the next sundown. She forced her legs beneath her, wavering as the world swayed like a storm-tossed wagon. Joey stood fast and held her arm. His hand was small but steady. "Grandma, what do we do?" She looked out over the endless plain. Not a tree in sight. No smoke on the horizon. Just heat shimmer and a sky so blue it mocked them. "We move," she said. "We follow the ridge. There's water down there somewhere." "Are you sure?" "No," she said, brushing the hair from Lila's forehead. "But we don't have a better choice." The heat baked them as they walked. The earth cracked beneath their boots. Each step was a gamble. Would the next one bring shade? Stream? Or just more nothing? By midday the canteen was empty. Joey stopped asking for sips. Lila started to cry, then stopped crying too. Her silence was worse. Martha's head swam. Once, years ago, she'd read a newspaper article about a man who walked out of the Mojave with the soles of his feet melted. She thought of that man now. Wondered if he'd been as scared as she was. Wondered if he'd had children to protect. The ground rose slowly ahead. A low ridge, hard climb, but maybe a better view. She gritted her teeth and pushed onward. Joey lifted Lila onto his back without complaint. "Good boy," Martha murmured. Halfway up the ridge, her knees buckled. She collapsed face first into the dust, the taste of earth flooding her mouth. Stars exploded behind her eyes. A dull, cold fear crept up her spine. This is how it ends. Joey knelt beside her. "Grandma." "I'm fine," she wheezed. "Just restin'. She tried to rise, failed. Her breath was short. Her arms felt full of lead. "Leave me. Take your sister and go," she said. The words hurt more than the fall. "No," Joey said simply. He sat beside her, arms around Lila. The 3 of them were just shapes in the dirt now, shadows clinging to each other. If buzzards circled above, they didn't look up. Martha thought of her husband, Ben Clay, always laughing, always stubborn. She thought of her daughter's singing voice, how it used to echo through the canyons when she was little. She thought of Sunday pies and broken fences and small joys that now seemed like a different lifetime. "God," she whispered, "if you're still listening, I could use a little help." The wind picked up. For a moment she thought she heard something beneath it, a low drumbeat perhaps. But it was just her pulse. Or maybe not. A shadow passed across her face. She opened her eyes and saw feet, bare feet, dark as oiled wood, toes spread confidently in the dirt. She tried to move, instinct kicking in. She thought she'd see a raider, a killer, a ghost from settler nightmares. But the figure crouched instead. A face came into focus. Young. Come. Eyes like obsidian, watching her with curiosity more than menace. Skin painted with ochre. Feathers tied into his braids. He held out a gourd. Martha stared at it, too stunned to speak. "Water. Cool water." "Drink," he said. The accent was thick but the word was clear. Joey reached for it and brought it to her lips. It tasted of earth and salvation. 2 more figures approached, another man older and a woman with a pouch at her side. They said nothing. The woman knelt beside Lila, checking her skin, her breath. The older man helped Martha sit upright, moving gently. Her mind screamed, Comanche. Everything she'd been taught rose in her chest. Stories of raids, of scalps, of merciless savages. But none of these people raised a weapon. None struck her or her grandchildren. The woman hummed a low song, soothing Lila as she passed a wet cloth over her cheeks. Joey didn't resist when the younger man touched his shoulder. We don't have anything, Martha croaked. No food. No trade. The older man looked at her and spoke in words she couldn't understand. Then slowly he touched his chest. Takana, he said. He looked to the woman. Naya. Then to the younger man. Atohi. And finally pointed at her. Martha, she said almost involuntarily. Mother, he echoed, nodding once. She closed her eyes. Maybe this was a dream. Or death. Or both. When she opened them again, Naya was binding her ribs with soft cloth. Atohi was cradling Lila in his arms as if she were his own sister. Takana was drawing symbols in the dirt, pointing toward the ridge and then beyond it. They wanted her to follow. You sure about this? She asked aloud. Nobody answered. She struggled to her feet, wobbled. Atohi caught her without flinching. His hands were calloused but gentle. She looked down at Joey. He looked up at her. We go with them? He asked. She paused. Her whole body screamed no. Every tale, every warning, every night spent in fear of war cries and arrows and blood on the wagon trail, it all said no. But her heart said yes. Yes, she said. We go. And as they walked, the wind shifted. Somewhere far behind them, the dust swallowed up the shallow grave. They didn't look back. The smell of smoke and sweetgrass woke Martha before her eyes did. The ache in her ribs had dulled to a constant throb, no longer sharp, just persistent, a reminder she was still alive. Beneath her, the bed was made of woven skins and softened bark, strange yet strangely comfortable. Overhead, a painted canopy of stretched hide filtered the morning light into amber patterns. She sat up slowly. Her hands trembled, but her body obeyed her this time. No chains, no guards, no signs of harm, just silence and warmth. A clay bowl sat nearby, steam rising from its contents. The scent of boiled corn and herbs filled her nose. Her stomach tightened with hunger. A shadow moved at the doorway. No, not a door exactly. It was a flap of hide, pulled back by a girl no older than 15. She stepped in cautiously, holding another bowl and a soft cloth draped over one arm. Her face was broad and serene, eyes unreadable but not unkind. You, Martha rasped, her voice brittle from thirst. You were there. At the ridge. The girl nodded once and knelt, placing the bowl at Martha's side. Then she dipped the cloth into a smaller vessel and reached for Martha's hand. Martha flinched. The girl didn't move, just watched. Then slowly she tapped her own chest. Naya. Martha let out a long breath and nodded. Martha. Naya smiled faintly and went back to work. Her touch was careful as she pressed the cool cloth to Martha's brow, wiped the dust from her cheeks, then offered the food. It was bland but nourishing, and each bite revived her. When the tent flap opened again, 2 smaller shadows burst in. Grandma. Joey's voice cracked with relief. Lila barreled into her side, clutching her with all the force her little arms could manage. I thought you were dead, Joey whispered. You didn't wake up for a whole day. Martha pulled them close. I'm still too stubborn to die. Behind them stood Takana, framed in morning light, staff in hand, eyes wise and steady. Atohi stood a step behind, arms crossed, his stare harder, colder. He said nothing, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. Takana stepped forward and extended a pouch toward her. Inside were herbs, bits of root, and a small bone charm. He spoke a string of words she couldn't follow, but the tone was kind. I don't understand, she said quietly. Naya rose and translated in broken English. Medicine. For pain. You, strong woman. Heal. Martha nodded slowly. Thank you. Takana bowed his head once and turned away. Atohi lingered a moment longer, eyes flicking over her, then Joey, then Lila. He looked at Naya and muttered something sharp before exiting. What did he say? Martha asked. Naya hesitated. Not sure. Not trust yet. You white. Martha swallowed hard. That truth weighed heavier than the pain in her ribs. Over the following days they stayed in the camp, nestled between sandstone cliffs and river bends. Tents and shelters rose like bones of the earth, stitched into the land rather than laid upon it. The Comanche didn't just live here, they belonged to it. Joey learned first. He rode with the boys, watched how they threw spears and painted their faces. Lila followed Naya like a duckling, learning the names of flowers, how to weave reeds into circles, how to hum lullabies without words. Martha, meanwhile, sat beside fires and listened. She listened to stories carved in rhythm, to drums that spoke in thunder, to grief held close and joy shared freely. She wasn't used to stillness. Her whole life had been motion, cooking, hauling, teaching, nursing, surviving. Now she was forced to rest, to observe. And in that slowness she saw. These people weren't the monsters from settler campfire tales. They were cautious, yes. Proud, certainly. But they were also generous, especially with those who had nothing to offer but thanks. Still, not everyone welcomed her. Atohi avoided her. When they crossed paths, he gave a nod, nothing more. Once she heard him speaking in clipped tones with Takana. She caught one word, Piu. Stranger. Outsider. One evening, as the sky flushed gold and shadows stretched long, she sat near the central fire. Naya joined her, humming softly as she sorted roots. Why does he hate me? Martha asked. Naya paused. His brother, killed by settlers. Burned house. Atohi only one live. I'm sorry, Martha said, but the words felt empty. He know you not same, Naya said softly. But still hurt runs deep. That night, Takana joined Martha by the fire. He sat without ceremony and gazed at the stars. You come from a land of fences, he said, his English slow but careful. Fences in the dirt. Fences in the heart. Martha didn't deny it. He picked up a branch and traced a circle in the dust. This place, no fences. No mine. No yours. We belong to it. Not the other way. She considered that. Thought of the graves they'd left behind, the towns that claimed ownership of land they didn't understand. Thought of how much she'd been taught and how much of it was wrong. I'm trying to learn, she said. He looked at her, nodded once. Then you are welcome. Later, she returned to the tent where Lila lay curled beside Joey. The children were asleep, their faces soft and open. She brushed a lock of hair from Lila's brow and sat beside them, watching the firelight flicker through the hide. Outside, laughter rose from the nearby tents. The Comanche were celebrating the arrival of spring rains. Drums thudded like heartbeats. Children danced with painted cheeks. Women clapped in rhythm. The air smelled of roasted meat and wildflowers. Naya approached with 2 bowls. One she placed in Martha's hands. The other she held herself. They sat together, eating, not speaking. After a while, Naya pointed to a mark on Martha's wrist, a faded scar. Fire? She asked. Martha smiled faintly. Kettle burn. Long ago. Naya showed her a scar of her own. Just above her knee, a curved line like a crescent moon. Fell from pony. First time, she said. The 2 women laughed, a quiet sound that belonged to the night. But peace, Martha knew, was always borrowed in these parts. Never owned. 3 days later, the quiet broke. Atohi rode in hard, his horse lathered, his face cut and bleeding. He slid from the saddle and shouted before he hit the ground. Warriors rose. Women gathered their children. The air thickened. Takana stepped forward, calm but firm. Martha rushed from her tent, the children behind her. She saw the blood, saw the tension. What's happening? She asked. Naya stood near, her face pale. Riders coming, she said. Guns. Many. Martha's stomach dropped. Settlers? Naya nodded. Atohi spat into the dust. They say we take white woman. They want her back. Martha looked at her grandchildren. Their faces were tight with fear. Will they fight? Joey asked. Yes, Takana said. The tribe began to prepare, not with panic but with focus. Spears were sharpened. Bows strung. Atohi donned war paint with steady hands. Martha stood frozen, watching it all unfold. Naya took her hand. They fight, for you. For children. I didn't ask them to. No, Naya said. But you stayed. That matters. Martha stared out at the horizon where the riders would come. She felt the weight of every decision she'd made, every scar she carried, every mile she'd walked from who she used to be. She took a breath and turned to Takana. What do you want me to do? He met her gaze without hesitation. Stand with us. The fire behind him crackled like thunder. The sun dipped low, red and unforgiving. Dust rose on the horizon. Martha squared her shoulders. I will. The sun rose angry and red, bleeding across the sky like a warning. Every breath the camp took that morning felt like it could be the last. Children were sent to the far canyon wall with the elders. Horses were painted with white handprints. Faces bore streaks of ash and ochre. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. Martha stood near the edge of the village beside a towhee, watching the line of riders grow clearer in the distance. Dust curled behind them like smoke from a lit fuse. 10, maybe 12 men. All armed. All white. One wore a red kerchief around his throat. Another had a shotgun slung across his chest like a badge. "They'll shoot first," a towhee muttered. "They always do." Martha's fists clenched. Her palms were raw from practicing with the old bow Takana had given her. She wasn't good, not even close, but she could hold it now without shaking. That was something. "They're not here for a fight," she said quietly. "Not at first." A towhee glanced at her, skeptical. "You think they'll talk?" "No," she said, her voice steady, "but they'll pretend to." Takana emerged from the central tent, tall and straight as an old pine. He wore a long feathered mantle, eyes sharp, staff in hand. A towhee fell in beside him without a word. Martha followed. Her knees trembled, but her steps did not falter. The riders stopped 30 paces from the camp. One man kicked his horse forward. He was younger than she expected, early 30s, with a patchy beard and pale eyes that looked over the camp like it was meat on a spit. "You the chief?" he called to Takana. Takana didn't blink. "I speak." The man sneered. "That old woman and them kids, you got 'em. They're from our train. Left 'em behind on account of the woman bein' half dead. Looks like she ain't. So we come to fetch what's ours." Martha stepped forward. "I'm not yours." The rider blinked, surprised to hear her voice. "Ma'am," he said, voice suddenly syrupy. "We thought you was done for. We're real sorry 'bout leavin' like we did. But you understand it was the vote. Folks got scared. Lot of mouths to feed. You didn't vote. You just left." Her words were low and razor-edged. "And now you ride in with guns drawn, expecting thanks? We came to get you safe." "The right way," the man replied, spitting to the side. "But you stayin' here? With them? That's no place for Christian folk." Takana raised his staff, but a towhee held out a hand. "Let her speak," he murmured. Martha stepped closer. "You don't get to pretend you're righteous," she said, her voice ringing across the space. "You left my daughter to die. You left me broken. These people," she turned toward Takana, toward Naya, toward the others who had gathered in silence behind her. "They picked us up. They carried us, fed us, healed us." She turned back to the rider. "You want me? You'll have to take me." His smile twisted into something meaner. "You callin' us thieves now? I'm callin' you cowards." He jerked his reins and turned to his men. "Grab her. If they move, shoot." A towhee's bow was up before the order left the man's lips. His arrow buried itself in the dirt between the rider's horse and Martha's feet. A warning. Not a miss. All hell broke loose. One of the riders fired, too eager. The crack of the shot echoed off the cliffs, scattering birds into the sky. Warriors moved like shadows, slipping between rocks and tents. Arrows flew, fast and silent. Horses screamed. Dust turned to smoke. Martha ducked behind a low wall, pulling Joey and Lila with her. A bullet tore through a nearby tent. Lila screamed, but Martha held her tight. "We stay down. You hear me?" she said, voice shaking but firm. Joey nodded, his hand gripping a rock, eyes wide with terrified fire. A towhee charged the center, spear in one hand, knife in the other. His face was painted with a line down the middle, black on one side, red on the other. Death and blood. His blade found the thigh of a rider pulling his pistol, knocking the man from his saddle. Takana stood tall in the chaos, staff raised high. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Around him, others rallied. The village fought not like a militia but like the land itself, steady, unpredictable, and full of fury. One settler tried to flank around a tent. Martha spotted him and without thinking raised the bow Takana had given her. Her fingers fumbled the string. She loosed too early, the arrow glanced off a barrel. The man turned toward her, grinning. He raised his revolver. A blur flew from the side. A towhee tackled him into the dirt, knocking the gun from his hand. They struggled, fists and elbows, until a towhee's blade found purchase beneath the man's ribs. Martha stared, heart pounding. Blood soaked the dust in seconds. A towhee looked at her. Not with pride. Not with triumph. Just tired understanding. Another shot cracked. Takana fell. The bullet took him in the shoulder. He dropped to one knee. Warriors rushed to his side, dragging him back. The line wavered. The lead rider, still mounted, still grinning, shouted something, raising his shotgun. Martha rose. She didn't think. She didn't feel brave. She just stood. The man saw her, raised his weapon. Atohi's final arrow flew. It caught the man in the throat. He made a soft, surprised sound and toppled backward off his horse. The rest of the riders hesitated. Just for a moment. That was all it took. The Comanche pressed forward with cries that filled the plain. Horses turned, breaking the line. Men shouted. 2 more fell. The others ran. It was over as quickly as it began. The battlefield was quiet now. Just moans and the soft rustle of wind through trampled grass. Martha dropped her bow and knelt beside Takana. He was conscious, grimacing, blood soaking his cloak. "You'll live," she said. "We all will." He smiled faintly, then closed his eyes. Atohi sat nearby, his hands shaking for the first time. Naya brought water. Joey and Lila ran to Martha, burying themselves in her arms. She held them tightly. Above, the sky had turned clear again, scrubbed of fire and smoke. Later that night, they burned the bodies far from the camp, beneath a stand of juniper trees. The tribe sang songs of mourning and thanks, old words that held pain and pride in equal measure. Martha stood beside Atohi as the flames danced. "You didn't have to save me," she said quietly. "I didn't," he replied. "I saved us." They stood in silence for a while. Then Atohi turned to her. "You drew a line today." "I didn't have a choice." He nodded. "Now you do." She looked out into the desert beyond the firelight. The same dust that had nearly killed her had now become sacred, soaked with blood, with truth, with change. She drew in a breath. Tomorrow they would bury the weapons, rebuild the tents, prepare for the next rain. Life would go on. But tonight they stood together, no longer strangers, just survivors. Smoke curled upward from the last of the funeral fires, its ghostly tendrils trailing into the twilight sky. The camp was quieter now. The songs had faded. The drums were still. Only the crackle of flames and the distant howl of coyotes remained to fill the silence. It wasn't just grief that held the air heavy, it was transformation, thick and undeniable, like the moment a storm breaks and nothing is ever quite the same. Martha stood alone at the edge of the canyon, her silhouette carved against the dying light. Her dress was torn, her hands calloused, her arms marked with healing scratches, but she stood tall. Taller than she ever had in her years behind a hearth or nursing the sick with quiet obedience. For the first time, she was not anyone's shadow. Behind her, the village began its slow return to rhythm. Naya moved between tents, whispering comfort to the wounded and fetching water with steady hands. Joey had taken to helping the other boys gather firewood, learning to whistle like they did, short and sharp, full of hidden meaning. Lila sat beside Takana, who rested beneath the medicine tree, his shoulder still bandaged, but his eyes alert as ever. She told him stories, ones she barely remembered from before the crossing. Tales of dogs that danced and stars that could talk if you listened hard enough. Atohi watched from the outskirts, sharpening a blade that no longer needed use. His face was unreadable, his movements precise, his gaze flicking now and then toward Martha. It had been 3 days since the attack. 3 days since blood soaked the dust. 3 days since everything changed. A meeting had been called beneath the sacred tree. Elders gathered on woven mats, younger warriors stood behind, and the fire between them burned low and steady. Martha was invited, not as a guest but as a witness. She sat beside Atohi, unfamiliar words flowing around her like wind through grass. But she didn't need to speak their language to understand. Tension hummed through every gesture, every glance. They were deciding. Would the tribe stay? Or move further south? Would they hide as they had done before? Or would they fight again? She listened, watched. Takana, wounded though he was, spoke last. His voice was gravel and wisdom. He gestured once, at the blood-stained ridge, then toward Martha. When silence settled, all eyes turned to her. She stood slowly. "I don't know what gives me the right to speak here," she said. "But I will because I must." The firelight caught the lines in her face, the hollows of her eyes, the iron behind them. "I was raised to believe the frontier belonged to those who could take it. That the land was empty if it didn't wear boots or speak English. That anything different was dangerous." She let the words settle. "I know now that was a lie. You aren't dangerous. You are alive. More alive than any town behind a wall." She looked at each face in turn. "You saved my family when no one else would. Not out of pity. Out of something stronger. I don't have land to offer. I don't have weapons. But I do have this." She stepped forward, voice steady, soul burning. "If they come again, I will not run. I will stand. With you. A murmur rippled through the gathering. Atohi said nothing, but he bowed his head slightly. Not in agreement. In respect. That night, the drums returned, not for mourning but for memory. For strength. For those who had fallen and for those who had risen. Martha danced for the first time, clumsy but free. Her bare feet struck the earth not as an outsider but as someone rooted. Joey and Lila joined her, laughter spilling from their mouths like music. Around them, warriors painted new lines on their arms, symbols of protection and survival. Life surged again. But peace, as always, was fleeting. It came in the form of smoke on the horizon. A new column, dark and rising fast. This time it wasn't just a dozen settlers. A full wagon train approached, banners waving, riders scouting the edges. Armed. Organized. And they weren't just passing through. They were building. Within a day, fences appeared. Trees were felled. Tents pitched. Claims staked in the dirt with iron nails and the arrogance of permanence. A flag flew at the center, white with a red cross. A preacher led morning songs. Women cooked in copper pots. Men built with rifles slung across their backs. It was a town in the making. Too close. Too sure of its place. Takana called a council again. Scouts reported what they'd seen. These weren't just settlers. They were veterans. Men who'd fought in the war and weren't looking for peace. What do they want? Joey asked. Atohi answered, voice like stone. All of it. Martha watched the faces around her. Fear lingered, but so did fury. She rose. We can't outgun them, she said. But we don't have to. She pointed to the ridge. That canyon? That river bend? That's our ground. We know it. They don't. Takana nodded, the fire returning to his eyes. Like the buffalo hunts. Not with force. With skill. The next day they prepared, not for battle, but for disruption. They became ghosts. Riders found their water stores poisoned with cactus milk. Tools vanished in the night. Fences were cut, then rebuilt in circles. Horses spooked at unseen movements. Wagons rolled into false paths and broke their wheels on hidden stones. No one was killed. But no one slept soundly either. The settlers grew restless. The preacher ranted about devils and wild savages. One morning they woke to find their flag burned, replaced by a line of red handprints. Martha was there for all of it. She moved through the brush with Naya, stole ropes and left stones in their place. Joey carved signs into trees to lead scouts the wrong way. Lila helped distract guards with songs from the canyon ledges. They weren't just surviving now. They were fighting back, with fire in their hearts. But the settlers didn't leave. Not yet. One evening, a scout returned breathless. They're planning something. At dawn. No one needed to ask what. Takana gathered the warriors. Atohi handed Martha a blade, not the ceremonial kind. Real steel. Balanced and sharp. You may need it, he said simply. She looked him in the eyes. So might you. The night passed in silence. No drums. No fire. At dawn, fog blanketed the land. A gift from the spirits, Martha thought. One last shroud. The settlers came as expected. Marching. Guns ready. But the camp was empty. Or so it seemed. They entered slow. Then, movement. A cry. A wall of arrows from above. Warriors burst from the mist like wraiths. Horses reared. Men screamed. Chaos again, but this time controlled. Precision and fury wrapped in smoke. Martha fought beside Atohi, blade raised. One settler rushed her, young, scared. She dodged his swing and struck his leg, dropping him. He scrambled away, eyes wide. She let him go. It wasn't about killing. It was about ending it. Takana stood tall on the canyon rise, staff raised high. He called out, once. Loud and clear. Behind him, fire bloomed. Not on people. On the settlers' supplies. Wagons. Food. Ammunition. Gone in an instant. The settlers broke. Fully, completely. They ran, not toward the camp, but away from it. Into the desert. Into their own uncertainty. By noon they were gone. All of them. The village stood silent for a long time. Then cheers. Cries of triumph. Of survival. Martha stood in the center, blade in hand, hair wild, face streaked with dust and tears. Atohi approached. He didn't smile. But he offered her his hand. She took it. Weeks passed. The village rebuilt again, stronger, deeper in the canyon. Hidden but not afraid. Children played. Water ran clean. Songs returned. One morning, Takana summoned Martha. He handed her a small carving, an eagle with a flame at its chest. You have fire, he said. Not just in hand. In soul. She closed her fingers around it. I learned it from you, she replied. He smiled. And she turned to the children beside her. Joey with his wooden spear, Lila weaving a braid into Naya's hair. They were safe. For now. But more would come. Always. And she would be ready. She had once been left for dead. Now she lived fiercely. Not just with the fire around her, but with the fire within. Smoke curled upward from the last of the funeral fires, its ghostly tendrils trailing into the twilight sky. The camp was quieter now. The songs had faded. The drums were still. Only the crackle of flames and the distant howl of coyotes remained to fill the silence. It wasn't just grief that held the air heavy, it was transformation, thick and undeniable, like the moment a storm breaks and nothing is ever quite the same. Martha stood alone at the edge of the canyon, her silhouette carved against the dying light. Her dress was torn, her hands calloused, her arms marked with healing scratches, but she stood tall. Taller than she ever had in her years behind a hearth or nursing the sick with quiet obedience. For the first time she was not anyone's shadow. Behind her, the village began its slow return to rhythm. Naya moved between tents, whispering comfort to the wounded and fetching water with steady hands. Joey had taken to helping the other boys gather firewood, learning to whistle like they did, short and sharp, full of hidden meaning. Lila sat beside Takana, who rested beneath the medicine tree, his shoulder still bandaged, but his eyes alert as ever. She told him stories, one she barely remembered from before the crossing. Tales of dogs that danced and stars that could talk if you listened hard enough. Atohi watched from the outskirts, sharpening a blade that no longer needed use. His face was unreadable, his movements precise, his gaze flicking now and then toward Martha. It had been 3 days since the attack. 3 days since blood soaked the dust. 3 days since everything changed. A meeting had been called beneath the sacred tree. Elders gathered on woven mats, younger warriors stood behind, and the fire between them burned low and steady. Martha was invited, not as a guest but as a witness. She sat beside Atohi, unfamiliar words flowing around her like wind through grass. But she didn't need to speak their language to understand. Tension hummed through every gesture, every glance. They were deciding. Would the tribe stay? Or move further south? Would they hide as they had done before? Or would they fight again? She listened, watched. Takana, wounded though he was, spoke last. His voice was gravel and wisdom. He gestured once, at the blood-stained ridge, then toward Martha. When silence settled, all eyes turned to her. She stood slowly. I don't know what gives me the right to speak here, she said. But I will because I must. The firelight caught the lines in her face, the hollows of her eyes, the iron behind them. I was raised to believe the frontier belonged to those who could take it. That the land was empty if it didn't wear boots or speak English. That anything different was dangerous. She let the words settle. I know now that was a lie. You aren't dangerous. You are alive. More alive than any town behind a wall. She looked at each face in turn. You saved my family when no one else would. Not out of pity. Out of something stronger. I don't have land to offer. I don't have weapons. But I do have this. She stepped forward, voice steady, soul burning. If they come again, I will not run. I will stand. With you. A murmur rippled through the gathering. Atohi said nothing, but he bowed his head slightly. Not in agreement. In respect. That night, the drums returned, not for mourning but for memory. For strength. For those who had fallen and for those who had risen. Martha danced for the first time, clumsy but free. Her bare feet struck the earth not as an outsider but as someone rooted. Joey and Lila joined her, laughter spilling from their mouths like music. Around them, warriors painted new lines on their arms, symbols of protection and survival. Life surged again. But peace as always was fleeting. It came in the form of smoke on the horizon. A new column, dark and rising fast. This time it wasn't just a dozen settlers. A full wagon train approached, banners waving, riders scouting the edges. Armed. Organized. And they weren't just passing through. They were building. Within a day, fences appeared. Trees were felled. Tents pitched. Claims staked in the dirt with iron nails and the arrogance of permanence. A flag flew at the center, white with a red cross. A preacher led morning songs. Women cooked in copper pots. Men built with rifles slung across their backs. It was a town in the making. Too close. Too sure of its place. Takana called a council again. Scouts reported what they'd seen. These weren't just settlers. They were veterans. Men who'd fought in the war and weren't looking for peace. What do they want? Joey asked. Atohi answered, voice like stone. All of it. Martha watched the faces around her. Fear lingered, but so did fury. She rose. "We can't outgun them," she said. "But we don't have to." She pointed to the ridge. "That canyon? That river bend? That's our ground. We know it. They don't." Takana nodded, the fire returning to his eyes. "Like the buffalo hunts. Not with force. With skill." The next day they prepared, not for battle but for disruption. They became ghosts. Riders found their water stores poisoned with cactus milk. Tools vanished in the night. Fences were cut, then rebuilt in circles. Horses spooked at unseen movements. Wagons rolled into false paths and broke their wheels on hidden stones. No one was killed. But no one slept soundly either. The settlers grew restless. The preacher ranted about devils and wild savages. One morning they woke to find their flag burned, replaced by a line of red handprints. Martha was there for all of it. She moved through the brush with Naya, stole ropes and left stones in their place. Joey carved signs into trees to lead scouts the wrong way. Lila helped distract guards with songs from the canyon ledges. They weren't just surviving now. They were fighting back, with fire in their hearts. But the settlers didn't leave. Not yet. One evening a scout returned breathless. "They're planning something." At dawn. No one needed to ask what. Takana gathered the warriors. Atohi handed Martha a blade, not the ceremonial kind. Real steel. Balanced and sharp. "You may need it," he said simply. She looked him in the eyes. "So might you." The night passed in silence. No drums. No fire. At dawn, fog blanketed the land. A gift from the spirits, Martha thought. One last shroud. The settlers came as expected. Marching. Guns ready. But the camp was empty. Or so it seemed. They entered slow. Then, movement. A cry. A wall of arrows from above. Warriors burst from the mist like wraiths. Horses reared. Men screamed. Chaos again, but this time controlled. Precision and fury wrapped in smoke. Martha fought beside a Tohi, blade raised. One settler rushed her, young, scared. She dodged his swing and struck his leg, dropping him. He scrambled away, eyes wide. She let him go. It wasn't about killing. It was about ending it. Takana stood tall on the canyon rise, staff raised high. He called out, once. Loud and clear. Behind him, fire bloomed. Not on people. On the settlers' supplies. Wagons. Food. Ammunition. Gone in an instant. The settlers broke. Fully, completely. They ran, not toward the camp, but away from it. Into the desert. Into their own uncertainty. By noon they were gone. All of them. The village stood silent for a long time. Then cheers. Cries of triumph. Of survival. Martha stood in the center, blade in hand, hair wild, face streaked with dust and tears. The Tohi approached. He didn't smile. But he offered her his hand. She took it. Weeks passed. The village rebuilt again, stronger, deeper in the canyon. Hidden but not afraid. Children played. Water ran clean. Songs returned. One morning, Takana summoned Martha. He handed her a small carving, an eagle with a flame at its chest. You have fire, he said. Not just in hand. In soul. She closed her fingers around it. I learned it from you, she replied. He smiled. And she turned to the children beside her. Joey with his wooden spear, Lila weaving a braid into Naya's hair. They were safe. For now. But more would come. Always. And she would be ready. She had once been left for dead. Now she lived fiercely. Not just with the fire around her, but with the fire within.
The prairie was a quiet sort of gold when the sun began its descent, stretching shadows long across the earth like memories reluctant to fade. Wind moved low through the grass, whispering through the dry husks of late autumn, carrying with it the scent of dust, cold iron, and the brittle smoke of someone's fire, far off, maybe a mile or two east. The cabin sat alone, leaning slightly westward as if it had grown weary of standing straight. It had been built by a man who died long ago, and it was now kept by a woman who refused to. Inside, she moved like someone used to silence. The hem of a curtain slipped between her fingers as she stitched, though the thread had frayed in places and the fabric bore the brown tint of years. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands falling across her cheek. She brushed them away with the back of her wrist, eyes half on her work, half on the window where dusk gathered like a secret. She did not think of herself as strong, nor particularly brave, but she remained, And in these parts, staying was the hardest thing a person could do. There had been another life once, spoken of in soft tones by neighbors who now avoided her porch. A dress she'd sewn for a wedding. A ring that never arrived. The man who promised it rode west with a freighter's caravan, chasing gold or peace or something quieter than a woman who asked too many questions. She didn't weep when he left, only watched until his shape vanished into the horizon and then boiled the water for supper, same as always. She had chickens now, 5 of them, and a garden that had given up after the last frost. What she had left was stored in jars along the wall. Enough to get through winter if she was careful, if the foxes stayed off, if the fever didn't return. It was nearly dark when the knock came, not on the door but against it. A dull, wet sound like something falling. She stood, holding her breath a moment, listening for another. None came. Only the wind. She opened it slow, lantern held high, the light trembling in the glass. At first she saw nothing. Then her eyes caught the shape. A man collapsed in the dirt, blood darkening the snow where his leg bent wrong beneath him. He was breathing barely. His coat was torn near the shoulder, his hat missing. She saw no weapon, no badge, no name. She could have called for the sheriff, but the sheriff didn't come this far out unless something was already on fire. She could have left him, closed the door, told herself it wasn't her place. Instead, she bent down and took hold beneath his arms. He groaned, but did not speak. His skin was hot, even in the cold, and his boots left streaks across the floor as she dragged him toward the hearth. She laid him down where the light was warmest, pulled off the ruined coat, cut the shirt with a kitchen blade. Blood had crusted around the wound but was still seeping, slow and thick. She cleaned it, wrapped it, stitched where she could. He didn't wake. The fire spat as she fed it another log. Night pressed close to the windows, and the storm lantern burned low. She sat across from him, knees pulled to her chest, watching the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He looked young, but not too young. His face bore the kind of wear that doesn't come from years so much as sorrow. Scar above the brow. Jaw that looked clenched even in sleep. The clock ticked, steady and tired. Somewhere outside, a coyote called to another. She dozed off near dawn, her head resting on the edge of the sofa, a blanket pulled half over her shoulders. The fire had settled into coals by then, pulsing like a second heartbeat. The man still hadn't stirred. The knock came again. This time sharp. Deliberate. She blinked herself awake, looked once to the man, then stood and opened the door. Sheriff Dunley stood with his boots planted firm in the frost, eyes narrowed beneath a hat dusted with snow. He didn't bother with hellos. "You got someone inside?" "Man fitting a description I was given." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. He stepped in without waiting, mud clinging to the corners of his coat. When he saw the man on the floor, he sighed. Not from surprise, but from something closer to resignation. "He's wanted," he said. "For robbery. Maybe murder. We haven't proven either yet. But he was seen near the Wells Fargo station when it burned. Bullet in his leg says he didn't come out clean." She said nothing. The warmth from the fire clung to her clothes, even as the sheriff's presence chilled the room. "You helped him," the sheriff said. "Nursed him. That's kindness, I'll grant. But it's also aiding a fugitive. Law don't look kindly on women harboring dangerous men, no matter how tender the motive." She met his eyes then. Calm. Dry. "So what do you intend?" He looked at her for a long moment, jaw working as if he tasted something sour. Then he said it. "There's a way this goes quiet. No trial. No rope. You marry him. That way it looks like you were his woman already. It makes the whole mess easier to explain. And if I don't, then I have to take you in. You know that." She closed her eyes, just for a second, and felt the weight of everything settle in her bones. The room seemed smaller then. Not from fear, but from choice shrinking to a single point, a needle's eye. The sheriff left a paper on the table. Said he'd be back tomorrow. Gave her the night to decide. She sat beside the man again. His breathing was shallower now, but steadier. As if even unconscious he felt the shape of the world narrowing around him. Morning sunlight crept through the window as she dipped the cloth again, pressing it to his brow. His lips moved barely. She leaned in. Eyes opened slowly, not all the way, but enough to meet hers. They were clouded, unfocused, but there was something behind them. Not fear. Not yet understanding. She felt his breath before she heard his voice. "Where am I?" "Safe," she said. "But not for long." He closed his eyes again. She remained by his side, cloth in hand, the fire behind her. The room held its breath, waiting. Outside, the wind stirred again, same as it always did, though now it seemed to carry more than winter. It carried the first faint scent of something changing. The man did not rise for 2 days. Fever held him fast, dragging him through its thick, dreaming darkness. He moaned sometimes, tossed beneath the quilts she layered over him, muttered half-coherent things, names, places, warnings spoken to the air. She stayed near, dipping the cloth into the basin again and again, changing the bandage when it soaked red. She spoke very little, and when she did, her voice was soft as mist. The chickens still needed feeding. The wood still needed stacking. Life did not pause because a stranger had collapsed in her doorway. But something inside her did. Not out of fear, she had long since learned how to live with that, but out of something quieter. She did not know his name. But names were not always the first truth people gave. Sometimes it was how they winced when turning their head. How they gritted their teeth against pain, refusing to cry out. How they opened their eyes like a man trying to remember why he ever closed them. He woke again near the edge of evening. This time for longer. She was stoking the fire when she heard him move, a small rustle of sheets, a shift of weight. She turned and found his eyes open, watching her. He tried to sit up and failed. "You're safe," she said simply. "You've been here 3 nights. Fever took you. Wounds clean now." He licked his lips. Voice cracked from disuse. "Where is this?" "A cabin. East of town. You collapsed at my door." He looked down at his leg, at the rough bandages she'd tied. His hands were scraped too, she saw. Dried blood under the fingernails, like he'd crawled a long way to reach her. "You should have left me," he murmured. "I didn't." That hung between them for a moment. He lay back, exhausted by the simple effort of conversation. She brought him water, cradling the cup in both hands, pressing it to his mouth. He drank greedily, then coughed, the motion rattling in his chest. She watched him a long while, trying to place what it was that felt different. He did not speak again that night. The sheriff returned the next morning. His knock came sharper than before, a man's presence before a man's words. She opened the door without a word, stepping aside as he came in. This time, he brought a paper with him, folded, creased, bearing a seal of official dust. "He's conscious now?" the sheriff asked. She nodded. The man stirred from the sofa, lifting his head slightly. His face was pale, but his eyes were clearer than they had been, dark, guarded, the eyes of someone who had learned never to trust first. Dunley removed his hat. Addressed the wounded man. "Name?" The man did not answer. Just stared, unmoving. "You were seen riding from the Wells Fargo post 2 hours before it burned. There's 3 dead. A guard, a clerk, and a traveler from Colorado. Someone took coin and ran. You match the description." The man's jaw tightened. "I didn't kill anyone. You were there." "Yes." "That's enough for now," the sheriff said grimly. He turned to her. "You've had time to consider. The judge arrives at week's end. He's not inclined toward leniency for women harboring fugitives. Marry him, and the court sees this as a matter of family misfortune, private. Decline, and I swear I'll take you both." She looked not at the sheriff, but at the man. His expression didn't change. He just said, low and hoarse, "Don't do it. You'd rather hang me?" "No. But I won't have you bound to me because a lawman says so. I ain't that kind of man." The sheriff made a scoffing sound, then turned on his heel and left, both heels clicking on the frozen porch boards. The door shut like a gavel. She stood still for a long time. The wind howled beyond the walls. Inside, everything had gone quiet, save the low crackle of the fire. She sat down beside the stove, poured herself a cup of weak tea, stared into the steam. "What were you doing there?" she asked. There was a long pause. "Then," he said, trying to stop it. She looked up. "I was riding with a freight team. Got wind something was going wrong at the post. Thought maybe I could head it off. When I got there, the fire had already started. They took off east. I was shot. They left me behind. And you didn't go to the sheriff." He gave a short laugh, more breath than sound. "Look around, lady. You think a man with a bullet in his leg and no badge gets listened to? You think truth makes a difference when the law's already made up its mind?" His voice cracked slightly then. She heard the tired underneath the anger, heard the weight he carried. She sipped her tea, letting the silence swell between them. Then she said, quietly, "I don't think you're lying." He looked at her, long, as if that statement meant more than it should. "I don't care if the sheriff believes me," she added. "But I do need to know if you'll stay, if this arrangement, if it comes to pass. I won't be left again." He blinked once. Something in his eyes softened. "If you ask me to stay, I will. But only if I ask? It's gotta be your choice. Or it's just another chain." They didn't speak after that for a while. The day moved slowly around them, the fire burning down, snow beginning to fall past the windows. Later, she found him sitting upright, leg propped on a stool, carving a bit of wood with her father's old penknife. She didn't ask what he was making. Not yet. That evening, she made stew, thin but warm, and he ate every bit. His hands trembled a little as he lifted the spoon, but he never asked for help. She sat across from him, watching the fire, feeling the strange new stillness of the house. He didn't speak often, and neither did she, but it didn't feel like silence. It felt like the kind of quiet that held breath instead of emptiness. When she brought him a blanket, he took it carefully, like it mattered. "Thank you," he said. She only nodded. But when he fell asleep later, head tilted against the side of the sofa, she stayed longer beside him than she meant to, just listening to the rhythm of his breathing, steady now. Human. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The sheriff would return. The judge would come. But tonight, in the stillness between judgment and dawn, she let herself wonder, just briefly, what it might be like to choose not out of fear, but from something else. And though she did not touch his hand, she sat close enough that if he dreamed of falling, he might know he wasn't alone. The days that followed were small and quiet, like folded letters never sent. Snow pressed deeper against the earth, and the sky turned a softer gray. Inside the cabin, time moved slower, held together by quiet gestures, a bowl set down, a coat mended, a shared silence by the fire. It became clear that the man, though roughened by what he'd run from, carried his pain with a kind of grace. He never asked for pity, nor offered apologies he didn't mean. He simply endured, and in the steady way he did so, she found herself beginning to breathe differently. His name, when it came simply. No story, no explanation. Just a name, spoken one morning while she handed him a fresh cup of broth. He said it as though it didn't matter, but the way he looked at her afterward, like he was waiting to see if she'd flinch or recoil, betrayed the weight of it. She didn't. Instead, she repeated it, soft on her tongue, folding it into memory like a pressed flower. Not because the name itself mattered, but because she knew now what it had cost him to offer it. He moved better each day. The wound, though angry and swollen still, no longer burned with fever. He could walk a few paces with a stick she'd carved for him from old fence wood. He made her laugh once, a dry, surprised sound, when he cursed the chair for not standing still under him. She hadn't laughed like that in years. Not since before the one who left her standing at the depot with a packed suitcase and a letter that said nothing. Sometimes they spoke. Not much, but enough. He told her about Colorado. About the mines he never worked and the money he never made. About a brother buried too young, and a mother who taught him to pray but not how to trust. She told him only a little. That she'd come west with hope and a dowry in a small tin box. That she'd stayed because leaving meant starting over, and there was no one left to write to. That the chickens had names, though she wouldn't admit them aloud. There was no romance in their talk. No flirtation. Just the slow stitching of two people learning to sit side by side with their pain. Still, the space between them shifted, almost imperceptibly, like a room warmed by a fire you hadn't noticed was lit. The sheriff came again. This time, she answered the door with the man beside her. He stood, leaning on the cane, face unreadable. Dunley didn't hide his surprise. "You're walking." "Enough," the man said. "What do you want?" "Decision." The sheriff's eyes went to her. "You signing it or not?" She looked at the paper on the table, a marriage license already half filled. The ink shimmered faintly in the low light. She said nothing for a long time. Then, "If I sign it, there'll be no trial?" "None." He looked at the man. "You're claiming her? As wife?" He nodded once. Slow and sure. The sheriff stared at them both, then laid down the stamp. "Then it's done." He left without ceremony, boots crunching over the snow. No words of blessing. No smile. Just law fulfilled, as cold and clean as winter wind. Inside, the silence settled again. She did not speak. He did. "I'll sleep in the lean-to. Just for now. Until you." "You'll sleep here," she said. He turned to her. Something unspoken passed between them. Not desire. Not yet. But a kind of trust that only comes when two people have watched each other survive. They shared a meal that night, simple as ever. Bread, thin stew, a jar of peaches she'd saved for first frost. She opened it without ceremony, set it between them like something holy. When he reached for it, his fingers brushed hers. She didn't pull away. Later, by the fire, he sat whittling again, a small horse this time, rough but recognizable. He placed it on the mantel, beside the clock that never struck quite right. She asked quietly, "Do you miss them?" "Who?" "The ones you rode with." "No." "Why'd you stay with them, then?" "Because I didn't have anyone else. And leaving meant dying. Or running." She looked at him then, really looked. "You're not running anymore." "No." She rose then, not out of boldness, but out of something quieter, the kind of courage that grows slowly, like roots in deep soil. She stood behind him, placed her hand on his shoulder. His hand covered hers, not holding, just resting. The fire popped gently, sending sparks into the dark. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The stars returned, dim but steady. She did not know what this was, not love yet, not safety. But it was something better than being alone. It was warmth. It was stillness. It was a place where the fire burned softest, not to consume, but to comfort. And in the hush that followed, when neither of them moved nor spoke, it felt like the world might just be big enough to begin again. The judge came 3 days later, a man dressed in wool and weariness, his boots thick with the kind of dust that settled only on travelers who'd seen too many towns forget their own names. He was not cruel, just tired, the kind of tired that made fairness a burden and justice a coin tossed in winter wind. He came alone but brought the weight of the law with him, heavy as an unspoken truth. They held the trial in the town's empty meeting hall. The pews had been dragged in from the chapel next door. Cold air crept through the cracks in the wood, and people wore their coats inside, breath puffing in clouds as they whispered and stared. The man stood at the front, limping still, but straighter now. He didn't flinch beneath their eyes. Not when the clerk read out the charges: murder, theft, fleeing the scene. Not when the deputy offered up a bundle of burnt fabric and a cracked pocket watch, found in the ashes. Not even when the banker's widow took the stand, trembling and pale, to say she'd seen someone tall in a brown coat riding away through smoke. He didn't protest, just listened. Every word. She sat behind him, hands in her lap, her dress worn but clean, the buttons fastened like armor. Her ring, thin gold, borrowed from a tin of heirlooms, caught the light only once and never again. The judge watched them both closely. "You say you're married," he said at last. "Paper here is stamped, dated, signed." He glanced at the sheriff, who nodded. Then the judge looked to her. "Is it your belief that this man is innocent?" She stood. "It is." "On what grounds?" "Because I've seen how a liar moves, how a guilty man avoids the eyes. He doesn't. He listens. He helps. He doesn't hide from pain." Some in the room scoffed. Others leaned forward. The judge asked, "Do you believe him capable of murder?" She said, "I believe he's done things he regret. But not this." He turned to the man. "What were you doing that night?" "Riding to stop them," the man answered. "Who are they?" He paused. Then, "Men I rode with a year ago. I left them. They didn't like that. When I heard they were headed for the Wells Fargo post, I knew they weren't going for mail. I tried to warn the guard. Got there too late. Caught a bullet and ran." "Why didn't you go to the sheriff?" "Because men like me don't get listened to once the smoke clears. They get hanged while the real bastards ride on." "And what proof do you offer?" "Only this." He reached into his coat, slowly, as if to show he had nothing but words, and pulled out a folded bit of paper, dirt smudged and creased at the edges. He handed it to the judge. The judge read. Then read again. A letter. From one of the men. A name signed at the bottom, known in town as a drifter with a mean streak and a twitchy hand. They didn't think he'd survive, the letter read. But he always was too stubborn to die right. The room changed. Whispers first. Then voices louder. The judge held up a hand. Silence returned. "This isn't evidence," he said. "Not by the law's standards. But it's something." He turned to the sheriff. "You investigated the scene?" "I did." "Any reason to believe this man set that fire?" "No." "But no reason to believe he didn't." The judge exhaled deeply, then looked to her. "Are you willing to stay bound to him, if this goes forward?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Even if he's never cleared?" "Even then." The judge looked at the man. "And you?" "I didn't want her in this. But she stepped in anyway. I won't step out." The judge stood, knees creaking, heart heavy. He looked out at the gathered town, the ones who always waited to see whether justice would be swift or merciful, and how much blood it would cost. Then he said, "I won't call this innocence. But I will call it unfinished. You're free to go. Both of you. But if I hear one word of another fire, another theft, I'll ride back myself." They left in silence, out into the snow-bright day, where horses steamed and children stared wide-eyed. The wind tugged at her coat, but she didn't shiver. She just kept walking, and he beside her. When they reached the edge of town, where the path forked east toward her land, she stopped. "You meant what you said?" she asked. "About staying?" He looked at her. "I haven't had a place to stay in years. But I'd like to try. It won't be easy. No. But I've done hard. I'd rather do hard beside someone who listens." She nodded. Then, after a moment, she held out her hand. Not as a test. Not as demand. Just an offering. He took it. Back at the cabin, she stoked the fire high. The wind howled outside, but within, it glowed, warm and living. He sat across from her, that same slow grace in his movements. Not the grace of a man unhurt, but of one who'd learned to live around the ache. He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Handed it to her. "What's this?" "Something I made. For you." She unwrapped it slowly. Inside, carved from wood, a small figure. A woman, standing tall, arms folded. Strong. Phil. "You got the hair wrong," she said, smiling. "I didn't carve your hair." She looked again. And saw herself. Not how she looked, but how he saw her. Whole. Unafraid. She placed it on the mantel, beside the horse. They stood side by side now, one that ran, one that stayed. That night, the fire burned low, slow, like a heart no longer racing. And as the wind pressed against the windows, and the dark settled in, she thought, "Let them speak of trials and verdict. Let them say what they will. Here, in this place between smoke and frost, she had chosen, not out of fear, not for law, not to save herself, but because some men run and some men stand, and some women, when given the choice, stay for both. The air in Dry Valley hung thick with dust and judgment. A sun like a hanging coin beat down on the cracked earth, casting long, narrow shadows from the awnings and broken fence posts. The square, more of a clearing than anything civilized, had gathered folks like spilled sugar gathers ant, and at the center of it all stood the girl, a sack over her head, rope around her wrists, her spine straight as the gallows behind the courthouse. She didn't move. Not when the wind pushed grit into her skirt folds. Not when a child, half curious and half cruel, threw a pebble at her shins. Her boots were scuffed raw, the toes caked in the red clay of the territory, but she stood as if carved from something heavier than stone. There was no shivering, no trembling, only the faint rise and fall of her breath beneath the rough brown fabric that cloaked her face. A man cleared his throat atop the auction crate. Tall, wide-bellied, with a voice like a busted church organ, off-key, sharp, and full of smoke. "What we got here," he called, drawing out the words, "is a fine, able-bodied woman for work and wifing. Strong back, no diseases. Quiet, too, as you can see." Laughter rolled around the square like tumbleweed. The men leaned on elbows and fence rails, boots crossed, brows sweat-streaked beneath their hats. Women stood further back, eyes narrow, arms crossed in judgment or protection. It was hard to tell. The auctioneer lifted one hand. "She'll cook clean, Carrie. No family. No claims. Bought legal. All debts cleared. What say we start at $10? A pause. A cough. The flutter of paper money in the wind. "5, someone said, almost jokingly. The auctioneer scratched his chin, weighing pride against profit. "5's an insult, Pete. She can't even look you in the face." Another chuckle, meaner now. But the girl didn't move. Then, a new voice cut through the heat, smooth and oily. 15. The crowd turned. He stood clean, crisp in a town suit that hadn't seen dirt in weeks. His boots shined, his beard oiled, and he wore the smile of a man who never lifted more than a glass. He walked like someone used to owning space, not sharing it. The auctioneer beamed. "Now that's more like it." He stepped closer, gaze narrowed, inspecting her like he might a horse. Circling once, twice. "Let's have a look," he said. There was no protest, no consent. The sack came off with a single tug. She blinked against the light, eyes pale and worn. Her face was neither beautiful nor forgettable, just plain, in a way that made you look twice, wondering what you missed the first time. Cheekbones high, jaw tight, lips chapped and unsmiling. A bruise darkened beneath one eye, nearly faded but not forgotten. She looked nowhere. Not at him, not at the crowd, not at the sky. Just past it all, like she'd seen too much of everything already. The man's expression shifted. Only slightly. A twitch at the corner of his mouth. Disgust, perhaps, or disappointment. He turned to the auctioneer. "Forget it." The auctioneer blinked. "What?" "She's not what I expected. You offered 15. And I changed my mind." He turned away, the crowd parting like reeds before him. His boots clicked sharp against the plankwood as he vanished back toward his carriage, leaving the girl unchosen, unsold, unwanted. Laughter came again, louder now. Crueler. "Maybe she's cursed. Maybe she bit off someone's ear. Maybe she don't speak, 'cause she don't got a tongue." The auctioneer raised both hands, trying to soothe the mood. "Folks, we're still talking bids. She's healthy, strong. Come on now, who'll give me 5? Silence. 4 seconds passed. Then 5. The kind of silence that chafes the skin. And then it came, low, calm, without flourish. "That's my wife." The words weren't loud, but they landed heavy, like iron dropped in a trough. Heads turned. Some frowned. Others blinked. A man stepped forward. Not clean like the last. Not well dressed. He wore dust like a second skin, on his coat, in his beard, around the edges of his tired eyes. His hands were calloused, one thumb wrapped in cloth. He looked like he hadn't spoken in days. But he repeated it all the same. "That's my wife." The auctioneer looked unsure. "You got proof?" He pulled out nothing, just reached into a worn pouch and placed a handful of coins on the crate. "Silver. Not much, but enough." The auctioneer hesitated. "She's not." "She is now." He walked up to her, slow as sunrise, took a knife from his belt and slipped it gently through the ropes at her wrist. His movements were deliberate, respectful. He did not touch her skin, did not meet her eyes. When the ropes fell, she didn't bolt, didn't thank him. She just watched him, searching his face for something she couldn't name. He turned away, then waited. She followed. They walked out of the square together. No parade, no cheers. Just two shapes, one trailing behind the other, melting into the heat haze of the road. The auctioneer scratched his head. Someone muttered, "That's it?" Another spat. But for all the noise, no one stepped in their way. Behind them, the square emptied. The laughter died. The sun kept burning. At the edge of the town, he stopped by a worn-out mule hitched to a cart. Climbed in. Said nothing. She climbed in beside him. The cart rolled forward with a groan. Wheels thumped over dry roots and broken stone. The town shrank behind them. They rode for a long time without speaking. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. But somewhere between the silence and the sun, she looked sideways and saw his hands, scratched, scarred, and resting loose on the reins, not gripping, not commanding. And for the first time that day, she let herself exhale. There was no kindness yet, no comfort, only absence of harm. But even that was a kind of balm. The wind picked up. Somewhere far behind, the town bell rang for supper. The prairie opened wide and endless before them, a sea of gold waiting to be crossed. And she thought, without reason or logic, maybe this is not the end. Maybe this is the road to something softer. She kept her eyes on the horizon, but a small, invisible seed took root in the dry soil of her chest. Not hope, but the shape of it. The road stretched like an old scar across the land, worn and pale under the sun. They didn't speak as the cart creaked onward, only the mule's hooves breaking the hush. Dust rose behind them in lazy curls, swallowed quick by the dry wind. Ahead, low hills rolled like folded quilts, dotted with brittle sage and the occasional stubborn cedar. It was a hard land, quiet, but not cruel, not like the square. He didn't look at her, not even once. His eyes stayed on the road, steady, steady, as if keeping them both from sliding back into that place. She kept her hands in her lap, fingers still sore from the rope. The sack had left behind a mark across her jaw, a red ring that would fade in days, but she knew some things stay even when they're gone. By late afternoon, the sun lowered its voice and the land turned golden with fatigue. A small cabin came into view, shouldered into the side of a low bluff. It wasn't much, squared logs, a lean-to for the mule, a crooked fence barely holding in its shape. But it stood. That was enough. He stopped the cart without ceremony and climbed down. Loosened the mule's harness with methodical care. She waited. Finally, he spoke. "You can sleep inside. Room on the left. There's a latch if you want it closed." She nodded once. The weight of silence felt heavier now that words had entered the air. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine smoke and dry earth. A table with 2 chairs. A narrow bed pushed into the corner. A stove, cold for now. He brought in water from the barrel out back, set it by the sink. Then he left her be. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling its unfamiliar give beneath her. She didn't unpack. There was nothing to unpack. Just lay back, eyes wide to the ceiling, until the dark pressed soft against the windows. Later, she heard him outside, chopping wood. The steady rhythm, strike, pause, strike, like a heartbeat too large to belong to a single man. It calmed her more than sleep. The days began to stack themselves, slow and careful. She rose before dawn, drew water, scrubbed the pans he left behind. He never asked. She never offered. But something about routine made the world less jagged. He worked the land, fixed the fence, mended tack by lamplight. She watched from the edge of the porch, hands idle in her lap, eyes tracking the way he moved. He was not fast, but he was thorough, like someone who learned to do things once and well. The mule came to like her, nudging her shoulder for apples she didn't have. She scratched behind its ears anyway. It was the first warm thing to seek her out. She began humming, quietly, just when sweeping or when folding the worn blue quilt over the bed. Nothing with words, just air moving around pain. He didn't comment on it. But one morning she found a small wind chime nailed to the porch post. It sang when the breeze came low and gentle. The first time she truly looked at him was during supper. He'd made a stew, not good, not bad. The kind men make when no one's watching. He didn't eat with rush or pride, just scooped and chewed, same as always. But there was a scar near his temple, half hidden by his hair. Long and thin, like a story he never told. She stared too long. He noticed, met her gaze without hesitation. She didn't look away. The next day, he brought back flour and a tin of peaches from town. Left them on the counter like a question. She made biscuits. They ate without speaking. The peaches stayed sealed on the shelf, some sweetness too sacred to waste on silence. The world outside moved slower than time inside. The town visited them in bits and pieces. A preacher riding by, nodding with soft eyes. A girl from the neighbor's place, all elbows and freckles, stopping in to ask if she liked wildflowers. "They grow behind our barn," she'd said, holding a limp bouquet. "Mama says they're weeds, but I think they're brave." The girl didn't care about names or past. She just sat on the step and talked, like the world hadn't broken yet. Later that evening, the woman found one of the wildflowers pressed beneath her cup. Its petals bruised, its stem bent, but it was still there. A week passed. Then another. And with it, a storm. Rain fell heavy one night, drumming against the roof like fists. The wind howled, rattling the shutters, and somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rolled like a hungry god. She woke with a cry caught in her throat. Sat bolt upright, breath shallow, hands clutching the blanket as if it might keep her from drowning. The door opened just a sliver. "I'm outside," he said. She didn't answer, but she heard his steps retreat to the porch. She didn't sleep, not until the wind died and the sky lightened. When she finally crept to the door and looked out, he was still there. Sitting on the step, soaked through, arms resting on his knees. She boiled coffee. Brought it out to him, wrapped in a rag. He took it, nodded. Steam rose between them like breath. Neither spoke. The silence was not empty. He never asked what the dream had been. She never said. But after that, she found her boots cleaned and mended by the fire. Found a new brush beside the basin. And a spool of blue thread where her needle had run dry. It was not romance. Not in the way folks whispered over fences. There were no stolen glances, no touches laden with meaning. Just this quiet keeping, this gentleness, like tending a fire without making it burn too bright. Once, while she was gathering kindling, she cut her hand on a sharp bit of glass beneath the leaf. Blood welled fast and bright. He saw it, dropped his tools, and crossed the yard in seconds. Took her hand gently, wrapped it in his kerchief, didn't flinch even when she did. "Hold it above your heart," he said, low and sure. She did. When the bleeding stopped, he let go. She didn't. They stood like that, hands barely touching, long after the pain had passed. And in the cool of that evening, as the sky turned lavender with dusk, something inside her shifted. Not melted, she was not so soft yet, but shifted. She dreamed that night of water, clear and deep. No monsters. Just stillness. The next morning, while sweeping the front porch, the girl from the neighboring farm passed by again. She paused, shading her eyes. "Mama says you're his wife," she said. "Is that true?" The broom slowed. Her hand tightened, then loosened. She looked out over the prairie, toward the man fixing the barn door with slow precision. She said nothing for a moment. Then, with the smallest smile the wind could barely carry, she said, "Not yet." And she went back to sweeping. The first frost came quietly, brushing the tops of the grass with silver while the hills still slept. She saw it before he did, just a glint on the fence rail, like something sacred had touched the land overnight. When he stepped out, coat already slung over one shoulder, he paused and looked to where she stood at the porch rail. Their eyes met, brief but held, as though both understood something was changing, but neither could name what. The days shortened. Shadows grew long and sharp. Trees thinned their leaves in graceful defeat, and the world took on a stillness, like it was bracing for something it couldn't avoid. Inside the cabin, the silence shifted. Not louder, just closer. They still spoke, when needed, wood piles, kettle temp, mule feed, but less now. Like their voices had grown cautious, careful not to break the delicate rhythm they'd found. She stitched. He carved. The days became tasks folded into one another, simple and wordless. She watched him sometimes, when he wasn't looking. The way he bent over his work, patient. The way he'd shake the snow off his shoulders before stepping inside, as if not to track cold into her warmth. He wasn't handsome, not in the usual way. But something about him felt rooted. A man not afraid to stay. Still there was distance. A long winter, not just in weather but in breath, in gaze, in touch. He'd given her safety. But safety was not closeness. It was only the absence of harm. She often woke in the night, curled against herself. Sometimes with old dreams clinging to her like a second skin. Sometimes with her hands reaching for something, then drawing back empty. He slept in the next room. She heard his steps when he rose early, his cough in the cold air, his voice low as he greeted the mule. But there was always a door between them, wooden and thin yet unbroken. The town didn't visit much in winter. Roads iced over. Wheels cracked. Even the preacher stayed put. Only the wind came, curling through cracks, whispering things the past had left behind. One evening, she found him on the porch, shoulders hunched against the dark. The moon lit the yard in pale gold, and his breath ghosted up into the stars. She brought him a blanket. "You cold?" she asked, voice hoarse with disuse. He shook his head. "Just thinking." She didn't ask what about. Sat beside him instead. They watched the snow gather in corners, heard the soft groan of wood settling. After a while, he said, "You ever gonna tell me your name?" She didn't answer right away. The truth was, she barely remembered how it sounded. It felt like something that belonged to someone else, someone softer, someone unbroken. But after a long silence, she spoke. Just the one word. Her name. It landed between them like a dropped stone in deep water. He didn't say it back. Just nodded once. The next morning, it was carved into the corner of the porch rail. Small, neat letters. No fanfare. No ownership. Just there, like it always had been. The snow came thick that week. Drifted up past the fence posts, piled against the barn. He came in late, arms full of wood, coat soaked through. She met him at the door, reached for his gloves, pulled them from his hands with slow fingers, laid them near the stove to dry. Neither spoke. She made stew that night. Her mother's recipe, what she could remember of it. It smelled like something from another life. When he took the first bite, he didn't smile, but he finished the whole bowl. That was enough. Still, the days passed without resolution. Like a song repeating the same verse. She wanted to ask him why he had claimed her that day. Why he'd spoken when no one else had. But the words wouldn't form. They sat heavy behind her ribs, sharp and restless. Then one night she couldn't sleep. The storm outside was fierce, wind howling like it meant to steal the roof. She sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, watching embers shift. He came in, hair tousled from sleep, eyes dark with worry. Saw her sitting there. "You all right?" She nodded. "You sure?" Another nod. But her eyes didn't meet his. He stood there, unsure. Then crossed the room and sat beside her. Close, but not touching. The fire cracked. Rain beat against the window. "I thought maybe you regretted it," she said finally. Taking me. He turned to her. His eyes were soft, but tired. I didn't take you, he said. I just didn't leave you. They sat in that truth for a long time. The wind screamed. The fire sighed. And something fragile between them finally began to breathe. He reached for her hand. Didn't take it, just offered. Let it rest open on his knee, palm up, waiting. She looked down at it. Years of rough work had made it hard, scarred. But it was a good hand. Honest. Phil. Her fingers hovered, then slowly slipped into his. Not with passion, not with haste, but with permission. It was not a kiss. It was not a vow. It was two exiled things learning how to be warm again. She didn't cry, but her eyes glistened like wet glass. The fire burned low. Morning was hours away. But in that room, the season softened. Just enough. Spring did not come gently that year. The thaw burst through the land like a fever breaking. Rains that roared for days, melting snow into wild rivers, snapping fence posts like twigs. The mule shivered in the lean-to despite the fresh straw, and the roof leaked over the bed until he climbed up one morning, boots slipping, hands numb, hammering shingles with a silent fury. She watched from the doorway, apron stained from kneading dough, breath caught in her throat. There was something coiled in him lately, tension beneath the quiet, like a wire pulled too tight. He moved as though chased, but said nothing. Not even when she reached for him. Not even when her hands trembled too. And then came the man from town. Riding hard through the mud, coat spattered, hat pulled low, horse lathered with sweat. He reined in at the fence, dismounted fast, and called out, not to her, but to him. Like they'd done business before. Like the past still had his address. She came out, wiping her hands on her skirt. The man was older, but not kind. Too polished for the frontier. Eyes sharp, mouth shaped by smirks more than smiles. He looked at her once. Just once. Then turned back to the man she knew. You sure she's yours? He asked, too casual. Her stomach dropped. The man beside her didn't flinch. She's not property. That ain't what I asked. No one spoke for a long moment. The sky above seemed to hold its breath. The man from town shifted in the saddle, eyes hard. Fellow come looking. Says she ran off from him. Says she's his by law. Her chest tightened. She felt the square again, the sack, the rope, the crowd's roar beneath the sun. She stepped forward, but he held up a hand, firm, protective. She didn't run, he said. She was sold. She was betrothed, the other corrected with a sneer. Bride deal. Contract. He's got papers. She didn't sign them. That don't always matter. It does here. The air between them sparked with something deeper than anger, history, guilt, maybe fear. The town man spat into the dirt. He'll be back tomorrow. Wants her. You give her over quiet and this stays clean. Otherwise. He didn't finish. Just mounted and rode off, mud flying in his wake. They stood there for a long time. Neither moved. The wind pushed at her skirts, tugged at his coat, but they stood fast as fence posts. Later that night, she found him staring into the fire, jaw tight. I won't let him take you, he said. I know. But it wasn't reassurance he needed. It was resolve. A man torn between the law and something higher. Something sacred. The kind of thing no paper could claim. I don't want a fight, he said. But I'll give one if I have to. She moved toward him, slowly, gently. Sat beside him on the floor, knees touching. Her voice barely a whisper. I never belonged to anyone. Not even before. But I'd choose to stay. He turned to her then. Really turned. His eyes weren't just looking, now they were seeing. Every scar. Every silence. Every truth she'd carried like a stone in her chest. Then stay, he said, and in that single breath there was everything. They didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, but choice. The cabin was quiet, and the fire burned low, but something in them finally rose, like sap in spring, like breath after drowning. He kissed her, once slow. Not claiming. Not demanding. Just asking. And she answered, not with words, but with closeness, with trust. Morning came pale and slow. The rider returned, but he wasn't alone. 2 others flanked him, broad men with pistols at their hips, spurs that clinked like promises. They rode up with purpose, horses snorting steam. She stood on the porch, he beside her. The man dismounted again, slower this time, less confident. You mean to defy a legal claim? He asked, eyes narrowed. She's no one's claim. I've got proof. Signatures. Witnesses. Sheriff says if I bring her in, it's clean. Then let the sheriff come himself. Or, the man said, smile tightening, you give her over now. No mess. No blood. The wind moved through the field behind them, whispering through the tall grass. She stepped forward. You think the law gives you the right to own me? She asked, steady. I think you were promised. By men who never asked what I wanted. That's not how deals work. It is now. The men behind him shifted. One reached for his gun belt. A slow, dangerous movement. He, her stranger, her sanctuary, raised his rifle. Held it not with panic, but precision. Like he'd held it before and never missed. Don't, he said. The moment stretched long as a shadow at dusk. The rider considered. Weighed odds. Looked at her again, and this time saw more than a girl from the square. Saw a woman no longer afraid. He spat again. Aimed it toward the dirt but missed. Then turned. You'll regret this, he said, mounting fast. No, the quiet man answered, lowering the rifle. I won't. They left. The road swallowed them like the sea does stones. Back inside, the silence felt different, earned now, not endured. She sat at the table, hands still. He poured coffee. Then he took the tin of peaches from the shelf, opened it, poured 2 bowls, set one in front of her. For sweet things, he said. She smiled. Not just with her mouth, but with her whole self. And as they ate, slow and silent, the wind outside died down. The fire flickered, warm beneath the old roof. And inside her chest, something glowed, steady, quiet, enduring. Not safety now. Not even survival. Love. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that builds like embers beneath the snow, until one day the whole world thaws.